Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. We are discussing the economic slowdown in China. China's economy is witnessing a crisis of confidence. The world's most indebted real estate company, Evergrande, has filed for bankruptcy protection in a U.S. court in a bid to seek a restructuring deal. The company has sought protection under Chapter 15 of the Bankruptcy Code, which will protect its assets in the U.S. Let me now go across to our guests right now. We're joined by close China watcher and strategic affairs expert, Chellaney, and we're also joined by ZongyuanZoeLiu, Fellow for China Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Chellaney, coming to you first, the crisis that we're seeing with Evergrande, how do you think this property crisis, this filing for bankruptcy in the US, could really spread to other aspects of the property sector in China and the Chinese economy as well?
The real estate slump in China is part of the larger economic crisis in China. And the economic crisis, in turn, is linked to long-term structural constraints that China is beginning to face. And these structural constraints are quite fundamental. For example, a shrinking and rapidly aging population, slowing growth in productivity, high debt level. You look at China's demographic crisis, that's deepening even as China remains a developing country as measured by workers' average incomes. Now, these structural constraints could put a check on China's overweening ambition to become the world's #1 power. And it has, as we all know, this economic crisis carries global implications given the fact that China is the world's factory floor. So whatever happens in China is going to affect the global economy. But the fact is that it'll be very difficult for China to come out of the present economic crisis given the long-term structural constraints it's beginning to face.
Right. Ms. Liu, coming to you, how do you see some of the steps taken by the Chinese government so far to address this economic crisis? Because experts around the world feel that no one is immune, and this slowdown in China could have ripple effects in the months to come.
Parikshit, you are right that international investors has the legitimate right to be concerned about the financial contingent, or whether this is potentially a layman moment for China that might have ripple effect to the global financial market. And so far, I would want to take a step back by saying that a lot of these financial contingent concerns comes from not just the real estate sector, but really about how these sectors have been financed. And a lot of these stories comes down to the shadow banking system, and in particular, the trust industry. Right now, the trust industry is about $2.9 trillion in China, and the Chinese regulators have long been thinking about how to get a grip of it. But so far, we really haven't seen enough in terms of increase the transparency of it. And related to that is also the another relatively untransparent sector, which is the local government financing vehicle, which is, again, deeply related to the local government debt. And that is another aspect of lack of transparency in Chinese financial system.
All right. I would also like to ask you, as far as the property crisis go, how is this likely to affect jobs in China, other sectors of the Chinese economy?
In terms of the effect on jobs, I would say so far the property market crackdown really had the direct impact, yes, is on the property market, but it created a deeper dam on the confidence level of both Chinese consumers as well as international investors' confidence in China. As a result, you see not just the Chinese households spending less, but also entrepreneurship inside China, as well as the international investors' confidence in China have sort of slided. And this actually have a very negative impact on the employment outlook. And so far, it seems
Right.
that the Chinese government not only paused publishing consumer confidence index since April, most recently, they also paused updating youth unemployment number.
Right. Mr. Chellaney, coming back to you, when it comes to protests, we have seen how the Evergrande crisis has also triggered some protests in parts of China. How do you see protests in China taking place currently due to the economic conditions?
So first, the real estate sector in China makes up about 20 to 24% of China's GDP. So the crisis in the real estate sector really is a major crisis that President Xi Jinping is confronting. Xi Jinping seems to be in a hurry to achieve what he calls the Chinese dream, or China's global preeminence, largely because of the fact that China is beginning to face structural constraints, an economic slowdown, a demographic crisis, a declining productivity. So he seems to be a man in a hurry. He believes that China has a narrow window of strategic opportunity to modify the international order in its favor before it confronts a deeper demographic crisis, stalled economic growth, and an unfavorable global climate. You know, the Chinese economy benefited from decades of favorable global environment. And actually, that free ride is coming to an end now. So we are seeing Xi Jinping signaling an increasing appetite for taking risks. So in that context, when protests happen domestically, the effort will be to clamp down harshly. And we saw, during these protests against zero COVID, the zero COVID protests were quite a surprise in terms of the scale on the scale on which they happened. They began spontaneously. There were youth-led protests in Beijing and Shanghai and some other major cities, and it took the Chinese leadership by utter surprise. And the Chinese leadership then, once it got its act together, then cracked down quite harshly on the protests. And we're going to see a similar trend that, where they're taken by surprise, these protests will happen. And then, once they get their act together, these protests will be crushed.
All right, we've run out of time, but Ms. Liu and Brahma Chellaney, thank you very much on this program. We'll keep out for the Chinese economic situation in the months to come, but lots to expect next week. The BRICS summit is all set to take place. There will be the China-Africa summit as well that we will be watching out for. And let's not forget the G20 Leaders Summit on the 9th and 10th of September that the world will be watching very closely. That's all we have time for. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.